Coming up on this episode of Common Denominator.
Tom Cruise is the most present individual I've ever talked to. Not just present celebrity or present A-lister, like present person that I've ever talked to. He looks you right in the eye and he's talking to you and having a conversation with you like you're the only person there. And that was a really big lesson to learn.
This is Common Denominator, straight-up conversations with Moshe Popak. Relying on critical thinking and open-spirited debate, we invite you to find common ground on everyday issues and encourage you to be bold, to be optimistic, and to take action. To learn more, head to moshepopak.com, and we'd be so grateful if you'd like, share, and subscribe to the show. Now, here's your host, Moshe Popak.
Hi, and welcome to the show. This week, the art of the conversation. Conversations can be awkward and sometimes really uncomfortable. In fact, after a couple of minutes, you may find yourself looking for the nearest exit door. Well, not anymore. Chris Van Vliet is a communications expert and four-time Emmy-winning TV host who has spent over 15 years interviewing thousands of people, including numerous A-list actors. He's going to teach us how to treat everyone we talk to just like a celebrity. Chris, thanks for joining us on Common Denominator.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So I know you've, in your journey, interviewed many A-list actors. Tell us a little bit about a few of those.
Well, I think that you realize that no matter what someone does for a living, whether they're, an amazing musician or they're an actor, director, comedian, I think at the end of the day, we realize that they're all just the same as you and me. And I think that as soon as I started approaching these interviews with A-list celebrities as a conversation like the one that we're having right now, that's when everything changed for me. It's the idea of like trying to get the best out of somebody else. And I think that when you're talking to somebody who's done a lot of interviews, like somebody who's been on the receiving end of those interviews, I think that you realize then as a host that they know what they're doing, right? This is a give and take. They're going to give you something in exchange for you giving you something. So it's like this exchange of value, I think is the biggest thing you got to go into it with.
So I love that you said that. And I think that that's great advice as we build courage to move through our day and to meet more and more people. I know in my business side, I just think the person needs to sleep, he needs to eat. He's just like me and you, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that piece of advice. So one of my favorite actors is Tom Cruise, and I know you also interviewed him. What was that like?
Tom Cruise was like at the very top of my list. So actually before that, The Rock was at the top of my list. I grew up as a huge wrestling fan. And like I dressed up as The Rock for Halloween when I was in college. Like I was a big Rock fan. So after I did an interview with The Rock, Tom Cruise was at the very top of my list. And I think that there's always something that you can learn from any interaction that you have, whether the person is a celebrity or, anybody else. And I think for me, the biggest thing was Tom Cruise is the most present individual I've ever talked to. Not just present celebrity or present A-lister, like present person that I've ever talked to. And we were in Paris. It was the Mission Impossible world premiere. We were in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower. And he came out and there was obviously thousands of people there. He paused for every single photo, signed every single autograph, talked to every journalist along the way. And even though I only had 2-3 minutes with him, he looks you right in the eye and he's talking to you and having a conversation with you like you're the only person there. And that was a really big lesson to learn. Like he didn't know who I was personally, but he treated me with this immense amount of respect. And he was so present in that moment. So I think that that's something that you can really take away from that situation.
Yeah, and I know being present it takes a lot of work, and he probably spent a lot of time doing that intentional work to be present. And we'll get into how we can get points of advice when we're having day-to-day conversations with people. We'll get into that soon. But I also am a huge fan of The Rock and how I think it's maybe over 300 million subscribers and on Instagram. It's one of the top on trending on social media, and I love what he does. I always say what brings people together is like food. So he has, his energy drink and his tequila, and just as a personality, he seemingly works extremely hard. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to do that, and keeps it humble.
There's something about him that's so relatable, right? And
Yeah.
it's funny because on the surface, when you look at him, you're like, I don't have anything in common with a guy who's 280 pounds, absolutely jacked, living in a huge house and can buy anything he wants. But he's figured out a way to make himself so relatable. And the great thing about talking to him is his self-awareness. And this is something I think you and I will talk a lot about today, but he has the self-awareness that when you talk to him, he knows he's one of the biggest stars in the world. He knows it's a really big interaction, big moment for you. He knows a lot of people are going to see this. And he turns the moment around and he makes the moment special for you. He'll comment on, a shirt you're wearing. I remember one time he's like, "Oh, looks like you've been really hitting the gym lately." And I'm like, "Oh my God, The Rock thinks that I work out. Like, this is amazing." So, they always say you shouldn't meet your heroes, but if your hero happens to be Dwayne Johnson, you should do whatever you can to try to meet him because he's kind and he's funny and he's charismatic, and he knows that he understands the place that he's in. And it's been really cool. I mean, we've all seen the videos of him online, like going out of his way for someone, like a kid or something, and makes the moment special. Or how about when he pulls up next to have you seen the video where he pulls up next to the Hollywood tour bus and he
Oh
rolls
yeah,
down the window?
that's great. Noel screaming. I've seen that. Yeah, in his
Right. Like, it's
pickup
those
truck. Yeah.
moments that are so cool. And I think that with Tom Cruise and with The Rock and Oprah and like insert name of literally anybody here, I think that they live with intention. It's the idea of waking up that day and going, all right, what's today about? What do I want the result to be today? And I think that when you can do that in your life and you can do that in every interaction, I think that's when you really start to get ahead.
Yeah, I guess also say like a deep sense of empathy. You talk about self-awareness of self, and but the more you do that, the more you have a deeper understanding and connection to other humans. So, I mean, I wanna just ask you, just on the side of interviewing other people, probably celebrities have been interviewed many times. How do you keep it? I guess I'd say, how do you keep it fresh, as far as
I
your
think,
questioning?
yeah, that's a great question because when you do these, they call them junket style interviews. So instead of flying the movie actor around to every different city, they fly all the journalists, all the TV hosts, all the reporters into one city and then do all the interviews in one day. So the actor sits in one room and then it's like a rotating door every 4 or 5 minutes of a new person coming in, a revolving door. And, if they're sitting there doing 30, 40, 50 interviews a day, I mean, how many times are they being asked the same question? Like, "Oh, what was it like working with Bradley Cooper?" So I think I started to think in my mind, like, if you ask better questions, you're going to get better answers. Like, I know that sounds really like simplistic, but if you really think about that, not just as an occupation and in a job, but if you think about that in your everyday life, if you're asking better questions, you're going to get better answers. And then those better answers are going to lead to a better conversation. So instead of asking something really generic, like, what was it like working with Bradley Cooper? Or what was it like being directed by Steven Spielberg? I started phrasing questions in a way of like, what's the one thing you learned from working with Steven Spielberg that you'll now take with you to that next set that you go on? And I think that makes people like dive just a little bit deeper, like dive one layer deeper and go, oh my gosh. And you still get a similar, like you're still asking a similar type of question, but you're asking in just such a better way.
Yeah, I saw that there was an article, I think it was in Inc. magazine, talks about the most successful people in the world. They just ask deeper questions and they ask more questions. So the more you're genuinely curious, and you shouldn't be shy to ask all questions so you can feel satisfied. It seems like that it makes sense to you.
I think a lot of people in like a social setting will go with the generic, like, what do you do for a living? Or, where do you live? Where did you grow up? I started recently asking the question of, what are you excited about these days?
Mm.
And I think that makes people go, oh, what am I excited about? And their answer then starts to tell a lot about who they are. Do they go, oh, well, my sister just had a kid. I'm going to be an uncle for the first time, or I'm working on this project that I can't wait to get off the ground, or hey, I've just found out my grandfather beat cancer. And I think that like asking a question like that you can really find out very quickly what that person's all about.
So, from all of your celebrity interviews that you've done throughout the years, besides being present, what are some of the key takeaways that you've got from them?
So Moshe, I think the number one thing is you got to listen. And I think that that's the biggest thing that people do not do. I think that they ask a question and they're already thinking in their head, what's the next thing that I'm going to talk about? And how many people have you met that basically just talk and then just pause and wait till it's their turn to talk again, right? We all know people like that. So I think it's important to actually listen. And if this is in an interviewing situation, I think it's important to listen because maybe they're giving you a little bit of a nugget that if you take that nugget and run with it, instead of going on the course that you think that this interview should be, you might get like something really good out of it. So it's the idea of being actually present and actually listening to the conversation that you're having. And perhaps you think that the next question should be this question, but that person's telling you something completely different. Be able to like improvise and go off and just like run with it. So I think that that's one of the most important things is just being able to listen. And like I said earlier, it's like that idea of just being present in that moment, being present in that situation, being able to listen. I also think that it's so important to know about that person. Like if you're going to go in and do an interview with somebody for their new album that they're promoting or their new movie that they're promoting, like just try to dig just a little bit deeper. Like just instead of just scratching the surface, like your finger scratching the surface, get a shovel and like dig in a little bit and try to find out something that maybe they've never talked about before or something that really lights them up.
Yeah, I remember my wife was telling me her professor, you talk about unactive listening. Her professor would tell her, she would always raise her hand often and take a moment to kind of, before you raise your hand, to reflect on whether it's necessary to even raise your hand. So if you're an excellent listener, and you're using your active brain, a lot of the answers will be given to you before you even ask.
I think another part of it is like, don't be afraid to like let someone know that you don't understand what they're talking about. We've all been in those situations where you're nodding your head and you're going, oh yeah, of course I know that person or that thing that you're talking about. I think that it's okay to go, oh, what exactly do you mean by that? Or, oh, could you explain that a little bit more? And I think that especially if it's recorded like this on a podcast or a YouTube channel, I think the audience sometimes is thinking the same thing of like, I don't know exactly what you're talking about. I'm so glad you asked for clarification there.
Why do you think it is that people don't have or developed those listening skills?
I feel like we're kind of all living like our own narrative all the time. So I think that sometimes we're just thinking about things through the way that we see them. And I think that it takes a lot of, like you said, empathy. And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness to realize that not everybody's story looks like yours and that your story is really just your story. So I think if that's something that if you can develop that, I think you'll be so much more successful as an entrepreneur, so much more successful in business, and just bottom line, like so much more successful in life.
Yeah. I also know before the show we talked about kind of open-ended questions. There's a concept that I like to talk about is you humble your ego and you allow them to shine instead of yourself. So when you're truly asking and you're genuinely curious who they are, I find that's a much deeper connection to people.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people are going into every conversation, and this happens so often in business, as you know, they're trying to figure out what's in this for me. What can I get out of this? What connection could this person get me to? What could that lead to? And I think instead, if you can lead with what can I bring to this conversation? What can I bring to this situation? I think that's where you really win.
Yeah. I know it took me a long time on your point, on the business point. It took me a long time to understand that in my first negotiation, when I was first starting out in business. I'm in real estate. There was a real estate deal, and I told the partner, I said, "Do you like this deal?" And he said yes. And the end of the day is what I said to him. I wasn't gonna negotiate with him. I said, "What is it? What is it that you want that will make you happy? Where I'm still a partner." And he told me what it was. And when I figured out that I'll do all the hard work and make money last, because you're always talking about, I know you were talking about before, everyone's thinking about me, but then that is not actually the recipe for success. Is that you're going to act first and you're going to give as much as you can possibly give. And you're going to, same way I think in conversation. And in the end, you'll receive so much more, but you have to be long-term minded.
Yeah, Tony Robbins always says the secret to living is giving. And I think you can think about that as in a philanthropic, sense of like the idea of like giving to like charities or giving of your time. But I also think it's like the idea of in interactions, like give more than you take. That's that whole Gary Vee thing of like jab, 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 and then right hook, like give, and then perhaps ask for something in return.
Yeah, I just want to flip this for a second. What would you do in a situation where you've done all this, you've tried to be an active listener and try to really connect with somebody and they're just not engaged?
I would just try to find some sort of like common ground. And I think that people need to realize, if we're talking in like professional interview senses, that the interview begins like the second you walk in the door or the second the Zoom window opens, in the case of one of these. And I think it's important to like bring the like charisma that you have, bring the energy that you have, and hope that that person can at least level theirs up maybe just a little bit. And then find like some sort of something that you might have in common. Try to find some sort of commonality or something that you can just connect on. And maybe it takes a minute or 2 or 5 or 10, but it's the idea of finding some sort of thing that you can connect on where you can build that rapport.
I know nowadays social media is huge, and you have 124,000 followers on Instagram, 309,000 YouTube subscribers, and over 110 million YouTube views. So I know people are out there trying to figure out how to build their brand. Maybe a step by step as far as how you went about that process to get to where you are today.
I'd say the best tip I have for somebody is just start. Like, I think that, and it sounds so simple, but I think that so many people get all caught up in the details of like, well, what kind of microphone do I need to have? Or what kind of camera do I need to have? Or what kind of editing software should I use? It's like, well, don't worry about that. Just start. Like, we all walk around every single day with this supercomputer in our pocket that has an amazing lens and an amazing microphone on it. So just start. Like, start posting things. And if it's interesting to you, it's going to be interesting to other people too. And then number 2 is be consistent. I think that people go, well, I posted a really great video last Tuesday and nobody cared about it, so I'm not going to keep posting. It's the idea of like, all right, well, post today and then post again this afternoon and then do the same thing tomorrow and then just keep doing that. And eventually something's going to catch on. We live in this world where everybody's connected now through the internet. So if something's interesting to you, no matter how niche it might be the nichiest of niches. If it's important to you and it's interesting to you, there's millions of other people out there that it's going to be interesting to them as well. So I think it's a matter of putting it out there and then being consistent about it so that you can find your audience. And it may take some time, but it's the idea of like, when someone does find one of your videos or your photos, they can go back and go, oh, wow, look at all these other great things. This person's been bringing value for months, years.
That's interesting. I think 2 really important points is the starting. I think I find the starting in all areas of life. I find different people that I come in contact with. That's what I find. I know that you're saying it, but I want to harp on that just for a second. I find the starting in anything that someone decides to do, to make the decision, because it always comes with a price too. I'm going to sacrifice time and energy, and I'm not going to see results for a long time. So I think the starting, I want to harp on that message, and then also consistent and not being okay with being self-motivated, not seeing those results. So I love that. I love those 2 points. Right?
When you stand at the bottom of the mountain looks really, really, really tall, right? But then as you get going, you're maybe a quarter of the way up and you can look back and go, oh my gosh, look at all this ground that I've covered. Then you're halfway up and you go, oh my gosh, look how far I've come. And I think that that's the big thing is people, before they've started, they look ahead and they can't even see the finish line. And they go, well, why should I even bother starting it? I mean, look, the finish line is so far away. And to that, we've talked a lot today about asking questions. The question I would ask in that situation is, what are you waiting for? Like, what is the thing that's holding you back from doing the thing that you want to do? And I think for a lot of people, it's the idea of like, well, what if people would laugh at me? Or what if I'm not as good as somebody else who I look up to? And I think the idea is you got to start, because you'll never get anywhere if you don't start.
Right. Right. I always think about it as, if people would have this framework that you live one time, that is an absolute, right? We're born and we have a certain amount of time here in this world. And if when we're healthy and we don't do it, that's not so good, right? So that'll be the catalyst for starting, right? And that's important. That's what I try to bring out here on the podcast is about starting. So I want to say thank you for that message. I know you also have a very successful podcast called Insight with Chris Van Vliet. Tell us a little bit about it.
The idea behind the podcast is the concept that we often just see the finished product. Like we just see Tom Brady with 7 Super Bowl rings, or we see, somebody who's just like a comedian that's on a world tour, and we don't see the process along the way. And I think it's so important to highlight, like, what was that person doing when they were 14 and this was just a dream for them? Or what were they doing when they tried and failed at this thing once, twice, 20 times? So it's the idea of seeing the journey along the way and getting some insight into what their journey actually looks like, so that somebody listening can go, oh my God, that person's already at the finish line that I want to be at. I'm only at step 2 right now. Man, now I know what step 3 and 4 and 5 is. I can reverse engineer this thing and get to the end. So I've had, the great fortune of being able to travel the world, talk to some of the biggest stars in the world. And I kind of selfishly, want to pick their brain and learn from them. And, if we can stick a mic in their face and hit record, then let's share it with the world.
But I think that every great person and things that they do does start with a process and procedure. Step 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's interesting because when I talk to people about taking the pen to paper and writing that down, 1, 2, 3, 4, when, I guess in a relaxed state, kind of right before you go to sleep, and you just write it down, I find most people, and it's an interesting thing, most people that I talk to them about that idea, they can't do it. It's an interesting thing. And I want to also bring awareness to that I like that you brought that out also about the process, because everything is a process. You see it. They make it seem so easy. But I'm sure with Tom Cruise, going full circle, like with Tom Cruise, you see that he's extremely present, but I'm sure there was years and years and years of intentional work that went into him being that way.
And I like to think that if somebody else is doing the thing that you want to do, I just feel like that now means it's possible for you to do it. And we've heard that story of Roger Bannister in the 4-minute mile like 1,000 times, but nobody thought it was possible to run a 4-minute mile, to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Then he does it. And within a few months, a handful of other people do it. And I think this is that same idea in life. Whatever it is that you want to do, if somebody's done that, well, figure out where they are. Maybe they're at step 77 in the journey. Well, then what's step 76, 75, 74, 73, all the way back to where you might be at step 3 or 4, and then figure out, okay, well, what do I need to do to bridge the gap between me and them?
Sure. So I appreciate that. Tell us, Chris, what other projects are you working on currently?
So we've got an incredible podcast studio in Las Vegas, and it's I'm with a podcast network called Blue Wire. And I'm so fortunate to be able to go in there and record in a great studio. Speaking of great studios, look at your studio. This looks amazing, by the way.
Lucky here in South Beach. Lucky guy. I know. Thank you, Chris.
Not a bad place to be.
I know.
My
right?
YouTube channel it's just my name, Chris Van Vliet. And, again, I feel so fortunate to be able to talk to some of the biggest stars in the world. So, if people are interested, it'd be awesome if they could jump over and check out my podcast, Insight with Chris Van Vliet, my YouTube channel. And then on social media, it's just my name, at Chris Van Vliet.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's really been informative, really great. Thank you.
Moshe, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to moshepopak.com. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show.